again, we want to welcome each of you as well as to our special guest tonight, Christian Long. He's going to tell us about using the design thinking process, what it is, and how we can use it to help transform education and our teaching and learning in the classroom. And he's going to share his bio and some of the things that he's been doing with the design thinking process. So I'm going to go ahead now and get ready to pass it over to Christian. And again, thank you so much, Christian, for joining us tonight and for each of you. And thank you. And it's over to you, Christian.
Kim, thank you very, very much. And I'm just very appreciative of a chance to be here with everybody. And what I want to say right in the onset is that in the last year or two, there's been a really remarkable exploration of design within the field of K-12 and education at large, but really in the field of K-12. And there are so many resources and programs and teams beginning to explore what the impact of design within the learning process and various ways to align that to teaching goals and what goes on inside the life of classrooms and schools. So I want to admit that this is going to kind of tease the edges of that, but I'd certainly love to be a resource in terms of making specific connections for anybody that's part of this chat or down the line. So I try to add some web links that have nothing to do with programs that I've been a part of or have authored, because I think, again, it's part of a larger movement. So I'll try to make sure you have access to that. I'm really going to focus more on the mindset than necessarily toolkits. And that's, I think, an important distinction in the sense that while I'll be speaking about experiences and programs and processes, really what I would love to make an argument for is that the design thinking mindset is something that is really sort of infinitely scalable or kind of impactful, and that the tools themselves, the specific steps, I think are important, but I think need to be explored and tested within individual classrooms and programs. So if you'll allow me to play more to the mindset, the point of view, rather than the specific tools, that'll be sort of where I'll go tonight. So in any event, again, thank you, and we'll sort of dive in. So what I am as an educator and a designer and somebody, frankly, who just really is madly curious about teaching and learning, what I'm really interested in is if we are interested in the future of teaching and learning, can we treat that as a design question? And so in essence, that's really the kind of essential question that I'd like to put forward, that if we treat the future of teaching and learning as a design question, what begins to be possible, or what begins to come to mind? So a little bit of context. For the last couple of years specifically, and much of the last decade, I have had the good fortune of working with a lot of architects and school leaders and students and communities, engineers and such, to really look at, can we design the physical learning environment to empower teachers and learners? So in essence, if we treat that as a design question, can we design spaces that really make teaching and learning possible? The images that you're seeing in front of you are a project that I've had the good fortune of being involved in. It's a public school in Chicago called the Academy for Global Citizenship. And it's a project that I was invited to be a part of, 5 years ago, to really look at, could we align a really extraordinary commitment to young people with the idea of space and place. And in this case, it's a urban public school, predominantly for younger children, kindergarten on up, on the south side of Chicago, where the majority of students are receiving free and reduced lunch, are often the first generation in their family that might move on to college. And what they asked us as a design team to really explore is could we reimagine what it means for a school to not only be dynamic and exciting, but also to be regenerative and, in essence, put more energy back into the grid. Could this tiny public school give back more to the city in terms of energy and resources than it took? And so as a member, in the last couple of years, as a member of Canon Design Global Education, architectural engineering team that does architecture all around the world. And then within that, a member of the Third Teacher Plus design studio. These are the kinds of projects we were invited to do. And through that process, really began to explore how can the mindset of design begin to really look at these kinds of interesting design challenges. Some of you may be familiar with certainly Edutopia, part of the George Lucas Educational Foundation, Edutopia being their kind of public media element. And they invited our team, the Third Teacher Plus of Canon Design, to team up with them 2 years ago with the idea that could we rethink a physical classroom as a platform for curiosity, for collaboration, for creativity, for problem solving. And this is a project that was released in this past August at the beginning of the school year, and it's entitled Remake Your Class. And on the surface, it appeared to be architectural. It appeared to be a very pragmatic design challenge. But in essence, it goes to the spirit of what tonight's conversation is in addition to redesigning a classroom, and I invite anyone to go and visit that web link and to watch, it's 3 different videos that are about 13 minutes total in length. And could we redesign a classroom to be a catalyst for creativity and collaboration? And really what we were interested in is, could we go beyond simply hacking a classroom or redesigning a classroom, but really foster a spirit of teachers and students becoming designers? And in essence, the premise of that project, again, goes to the heart of this discussion, is could we treat design as a mindset, not just necessarily something that's done to you or coming in and changing a classroom and it's physical in nature, but could really be kind of a heart and a spirit and a mindset. So I invite you to look at that, and again, it creates a little bit more, kind of a little bit more context. What has become more and more true as I've had the fortune of working with a lot of really remarkable designers and architects, planners, educators, school leaders, is that at this day and age, while there are many different objects and elements that we're trying to consider, whether that be iPads or STEM versus STEAM or even design thinking, if you would, that ultimately what we're trying to do is position young people to be agile in the future. And I think if this image, which is very much meant to be iconic and symbolic, if we really consider this image, it represents a historical view of education. And I think there's a lot that could be discussed there, but let's assume one simple premise, that historically, the idea of education, the invitation to students was essentially that if you will trust us and show up on time and stand in line and do the work that we ask you and look us in the eye, shake our hands and sort of be thoughtful and intentional and responsible, that the outcome of that is a really remarkable opportunity. We can pretty much guarantee you an opportunity at the next level of school, the next level of university, and ideally the next level of an organization or a discipline, a way of engaging the world professionally. The challenge for us in this day and age is not necessarily to kind of roll our eyes at this historic view. There's a lot of remarkable good that we want to hold on to this, but really to rethink the value proposition. And historically, if the idea was, if you will be responsible as a learner, we will guarantee you a particular outcome. And what we imagine today as a designer is that the future of the world and the future of society, the future of human relationships and the future of work, et cetera, suggests maybe a new invitation, maybe a yes and invitation. And to that degree, what we're really curious about is, can we foster not only an ability to be responsible, but can we foster within young people and the learning community at large the ability to respond? So in essence, if historically we believe there was a practical path, a linear path, a predictable path, what we are looking at now in the future as a designer is that the future is no longer predictable, and that young people and educators and school communities need to be agile, in essence, more than just being responsible, but have the ability to respond. As a designer, we spend a lot of time thinking about the expectations globally, regionally, nationally, locally, in terms of what does it mean to design a learning environment that's going to put young people in a position to thrive, to be agile. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with PISA scores. That's the sort of international benchmark that would compare one nation to another, predominantly in science, math, and literacy. And it's a really important benchmark. Every couple of years, the new scores come out and will suggest where one country is based on another. And it's often why it's seen that Singapore is ranked at the top. A country like Finland is ranked at the top. A country like the United States is often ranked in the middle, if not the bottom, of those international scores, and often drives the national and political and global discussion. In essence, how do we efficiently raise scores? There's another set of scores called the GEM scores that, as a design team, becomes really, really interesting. GEM stands for Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And what's fascinating about this is if we look at PISA scores as being a fairly linear way of understanding how one learns math, science, literacy, etc. What the GEM scores suggest something different. And so what this graph shows are kind of PISA scores mapped against GEM scores. And in essence, what GEM scores really refer to, both in spirit and example, is this idea of our ability to solve problems, our ability to be entrepreneurial, our ability to handle complexity and uncertainty and to solve problems regardless. So in essence, these two scores, PISA scores having come into existence about the year 2000 and GEM scores having come into existence globally about the year 1999, so pretty much kind of at the same time. And in essence, what becomes interesting as a designer is not one versus the other, but kind of the and. So in essence, we could measure schools or countries, if you would, in terms of their ability to predictably perform in science, math, et cetera, or we could measure them in terms of their ability to wrestle with ambiguity, their ability to be agile, their ability to be entrepreneurial. Frankly, what's really interesting in here is which countries do well in both. The US does very, very well entrepreneurial, but not so well in terms of math and science. Singapore does very, very well in terms of math and science, but not necessarily in terms of entrepreneurialism. On the other hand, Australia does very well in both. So that's an interesting design premise. So in essence, when we look forward, we're not looking to design for either or, but really kind of an and. And when we place that against a lot of discussions that are emerging around the world, and this is specifically a New York Times article that came out a year or so ago that's really beginning to look at the idea of grit, persistence, stubbornness, failure, curiosity, creativity. And that's a really interesting trend in terms of what are we really looking to foster in terms of learning environments? What are we looking at from a design standpoint? If we could design for the future of learning, and we're starting to suggest that failure might actually be vital, not something to get rid of, but actually something to foster. Is curiosity and being entrepreneurial and such important? What does that mean in terms of design? So what I want to suggest for the rest of this session is a different design question, not so much what's right, what's wrong, STEM versus STEAM, math versus arts, whether or not we should be test score based or Montessori or Reggio based, but in essence, let's assume a different question. Are we being brave enough as educators? Are we really being bold enough, not so much about iPads versus laptops or a maker space versus a computer lab, English departments versus math departments, but let's broaden it a little bit bigger. So I want to share with you something that's been really provocative to my team and the people that I've been working with in the last year or two that's kind of caught our attention. I don't know if anybody has noticed something called Singularity University. At the higher ed level, there are certainly lots of trends that are interesting. edX, a merger of MIT and Harvard to offer free online courses, Udacity, Coursera, on and on and on, lots of higher ed things. But there's a program that's really remarkable called Singularity University that in essence is challenging the very model of higher ed in a very, very provocative way. So this is in essence the essential question, the prompt, and maybe more importantly, the invitation that Singularity University offers to its students on a year-in, year-in basis. And so let me phrase this. This is the day one invitation. And in essence, it says every single year we ask them, the students, to team up in the essence of starting a company, a product, a service, a platform that will, and this is the key, positively affect 1 billion people minimum within 10 years. So in essence, we're not talking about a higher ed program that says, come learn how to do X so that you can move into this industry, or it's about online education versus face-to-face. What we're saying is a university that starts day one with saying you and your team must launch a product, service, etc., that will positively impact 1 billion people within 10 years. Now, here's what's interesting about this. 10 years ago, you couldn't have identified a single company on the planet that had proven this out. Now you can point to dozens upon dozens of companies that have had, and again, it's subjective, but have had an impact on 1 billion or more people within a single 10-year period. What's interesting about this is if we as educators at the K-12 level begin to really think that our goal is not to simply move people in a linear progression from 5th grade to 6th grade, from middle school to high school, from high school to a college to a master's or doctorate program. And that is our historical commitment. But instead, we're trying to position young people to be bold about what it means to solve wicked problems. What does it mean when Elon Musk says we're going to create, Tesla, we're going to create SpaceX? What does it mean when young people believe they can drop out of college as a 19-year-old and to be accepted into the Teal Fellowship to start a company that most likely will go out of business, but that will be the first of several startups? What does it mean to do this as a mindset? And as a designer, can we foster the mindset that will allow this to be more and more true? So in essence, I'll point to Singularity University. I'll also point in one of the links to Design for Change, which is a program that works more specifically with K-12, but it's a free program for young people around the world that over the last 4 years has created a design platform that is now working with over 30 million children in over 30 countries around the world. And here's the kicker, for free. And here's the second kicker, not dependent upon schools or teachers within schools to make that possible. We live in a day and age where the very idea that young people can be empowered to solve wicked problems is becoming more and more the norm, regardless of the STEM versus STEAM debate, regardless of whether we roll out iPads, regardless. So I want to admit 3 biases, which are probably already glaringly true, but I want to suggest that from a design thinking standpoint, and we'll get into design thinking more specifically, if we assumed the following as non-negotiable, what might we foster from a design my point? Number one, if we believe that our job as educators, as leaders within school communities, as unapologetic geeks about learning and education, as people who can put our shoulder behind the future of education, if we believe that, one, our primary job is to empower learners so that they can empower themselves. Now we can argue or maybe debate the semantics of, can you empower somebody so they can be empowered? But if we say day one, our job is not to get kids into college per se, but it's simply to empower learners so that they will, for the rest of their lives, be able to empower themselves. It's an interesting design premise. 2, we do so that they can empower the communities around them. So what I mean by that is if young people, through education, are able to empower themselves through a multiplicity of experiences, 2, so that they can empower the communities around them, and 3, so that they can empower the world at large, that becomes an interesting mindset as a designer. So we're not seeing these as wonderful bonuses or wonderful sort of an extension of a project-based learning or service project, but this is a default setting. Then what might we consider or create or invest in? What might we begin to play with? So the question becomes, as an educator, what does that look like? Now, I want to point to a program that I think many are becoming curious about, have spent time investigating, but I'm also not sure if everybody is. So the design school, which is affectionately known as the D School at Stanford University, is a program that has not only become provocative and interesting for a lot of educators, but is a program that's really providing remarkable design thinking resources for free on a regular basis to educators at all levels. And they have a particular passion for K-12 educators. I put a link into something called the K-12 Lab, and that is specifically a set of resources that the D School at Stanford provides for K-12 educators. And also there's another link called Design Thinking for Educators that you can click to, which is a set of initiatives and resources fostered by IDEO, which is a globally recognized design firm, and several other educational platforms. So I recommend that any of you go there. But what I want to point to you is a very specific program that I think for K-12 educators in particular is really extraordinary because it does two things. It suggests where are our young people going to migrate over time. And I don't mean that they're all going to go to Stanford. That's not the point. But what are the sort of the default settings and mindsets and opportunities and frankly responsibilities of young people as they hit the adult world that may not have been true for the majority of us when we were going through school. So while the D School is interesting, there's a particular program there called Entrepreneurial Design for Extreme Affordability. In essence, this is how do we take the wicked problems of the world that really are focused on extreme poverty, extreme off the grid experiences, where the rest of the world is not getting the iPhone, but they need to really wrestle with things like access to water, access to heat, access to technology, solar, etc. So it's a really interesting project that invites a very multidisciplinary group of graduate students on a year-in basis to look for interesting problems in the developing world, or at least where poverty is the norm, and applies a design mindset to that. So I want to share with you one interesting project that a group of students were involved in that I think is indicative of why design thinking matters. And then I'm going to pull back down to K-12 again. So if we look at the problem of premature births, it's a very real problem. This is not a conceptual problem. It's certainly a problem that real professionals, real non-for-profits, real NGOs, real leaders wrestle with on a constant basis. And frankly, is the kind of project that a middle school or high school student, elementary student is going to fall in love with too, because it's about babies. So on an annual basis, there are approximately 20 million premature births a year. That means in the danger zone, not just born a couple of days early, but often weeks and months early. On average, 4 million young premature babies die a year. And that's about 450 premature babies die each day by virtue of simply being born early. And really what that means is they don't have access to the technology that would allow them to possibly mature to being healthy and independent of a hospital. What that means is they need an incubator. The average incubator costs often in the neighborhood of about $20,000. Now, as a design problem, this is a wicked problem. It has huge scope, huge scale, but it also means we could build something. We could build something that's better technology and something that would be worth less and less money. So let's now take a look at what this means in real time if you are a student that's meant to look at a problem like this. In a lot of parts of the world where you can't afford the kind of incubator that sort of a US-based hospital or European-based hospital or kind of in sort of modern world, what often you're looking at is how do you get heat into a contained space to keep that baby alive? Often that means hacking things like a desk lamp, a bucket or a plastic box, tubes that would allow heat to move in. And this is often what we're looking at in hospitals around the world. And this is once that baby is even in the hospital. So imagine being a group of students from the design school who have been invited to wrestle with this big problem, and they go to a hospital like this, and they suddenly look at this and think, how could we fix this? So I'm going to jump to the chase a little bit. So these students use the design thinking process, and that's what we'll get into in more detail. These are really smart students coming from different disciplines like economics, engineering, education, social entrepreneurism, physics, math, you name it, and are learning a process of design thinking. And essentially design thinking, if you don't already know, is a belief that it's a human-centered experience. So you're not necessarily focused on the object, but you're focused on the impact on human beings. Two, it starts with empathy. It moves through discovery or research or that sort of thing. It then goes into a process of iteration or brainstorming, and then moves into prototyping or making up kind of an initial concept of physical expression. And then eventually you're testing and you're going through that cycle over and over again. So that's kind of design thinking 101. So let's imagine you're a very bright student and you're teamed up with other bright students and you know this process. So you've gone beyond being curious, you have been trained. What do you do in this situation? This is a very real problem and a very real reality. So here's the story behind this. A group of students from Stanford who were trained in this process, which I would imagine many of you at least have inquired about, and hence your interest tonight. And they looked at this and immediately thought, we know how to solve this. And they did. They built a beautiful incubator that was not only able to be deployed into a hospital very much like this, but more importantly, or equally importantly, it was remarkably less expensive. So let's imagine they did what we as teachers would be extraordinarily proud of. They built a real product that could be deployed to the real world and was at a much cheaper price point and could be tested and hopefully save lives. That's an incredible success story and often beyond the realm of K-12 education. However, it's suggestive of the kinds of things we would want our students to wonder about, daydream about, brainstorm about, and maybe even over time in their future do. Here's the catch. When these students released their prototype, their incubator, into a real hospital, something really heartbreaking happened. Nobody showed up. No babies were placed inside that incubator. So this is the extreme example of success that ends up not working. And that's a really interesting design challenge, whether you're a pure designer or you're a teacher, you're in the non-for-profit world, you're trying to start a new company. It's the ultimate what happened. We did all the right things. We learned a process that was powerful, and we did it, and nobody came. Nobody bought the product. It didn't save lives, whatever it is. Now, I think in the world of K-12, we often are shielded from that end result because we know that there's plenty of time to get to that. But I think our young people, and also we, realize the practical implications are real and now, and our young people are hungry to make an impact. So here's the second part of the story. When the students realized that when they were doing their research, they jumped to the wrong conclusion. They assumed if they could solve the problem, hence build a better incubator, they would be successful. And they did. The problem was not that the incubator was the wrong thing, but that no babies were getting to the hospital. What it was less a problem about technology, engineering, manufacturing, and even a physical prototype. It was more a problem of two things. One is that mother who is going to have to let go of her baby, and keep in mind, a premature baby, that mother was not willing to let go of that baby to allow the hospital to do its job. So in essence, the mother was never going to deliver the baby to the actual hospital. That's a really interesting psychological, cultural, behavioral problem that design thinking gets at the heart of because it demands one simple thing first and foremost, not prototyping, not testing, not brainstorming, not ideation, none of that. Number one, the process begins with empathy. It begins with, are we listening, watching, trying to understand what people truly need? So in essence, if they had thought about the incubator first, they would fail, which they did. However, if they looked at that mother's eye contact and thought about the act of her holding that baby, or more importantly, letting go of that baby, they might have realized that the real problem was a problem of letting go, a problem of transportation, not a problem of incubator. What they eventually designed was something called the embrace. And that is nothing more complicated than swaddling cloth, a multi-thousand-year-old technology that would wrap itself around a baby, but more importantly, allow the mother to let go of the baby, keep the baby warm for 6 to 8 hours, and eventually deliver the baby to a hospital so that the medical personnel could take care of it. Now, as a human being, as a father, as an educator, as a designer, there are so many life lessons in that. Ultimately, maybe it's about the technology of that blanket, which was highly sophisticated. But more importantly, it's about understanding what's the problem we're really trying to solve. And I think often as educators, we live in a world where we know our young people are capable of such remarkable imagination, such remarkable leaps of faith. But often when we get into these design thinking or engineering or STEAM or STEM problems, we often focus on the end result, the product, the prototype, the brainstorming. And really what's beautiful about design thinking is it focuses first and foremost on human beings. It focuses on empathy. It is ultimately the most important commitment to other human beings we could ever offer them. It's listening, watching, observing, and really trying to think through what is possible. So in essence, why I really love this is as we think about the future of education, we really are invited to think about the mindset of the future, meaning not just getting kids into college, not just becoming better mathematicians, not just thinking about AP scores, not just thinking about could our schools have better playgrounds and better lunch programs, but in essence, what's the mindset of the future? And in essence, I'm going to argue Can we have a mindset for the future that first and foremost is biased towards empathy, biased towards discovering what human beings need, and then being infinitely agile in terms of ways to respond to that. And that is, in essence, what I think design thinking really allows. I think when you take an example like the Embrace product, what you realize is it was loaded with failure. These very successful Stanford graduate students with all the training in the world, all the resources in the world, they had an epic fail. They built a beautiful product and then realized it was the wrong product because they had asked the wrong question. Now, as K-12 educators, as coaches, as rabbis, as camp counselors, as designers, as whomever we are, imagine if there was a rigorous methodology, a rigorous pedagogy, a rigorous process that not only doubled down on empathy, doubled down on a commitment to making human lives better, but also said the only way forward is to fail. And not in sort of a cheeky, kind of like, let's fail because there are no dumb questions. But I mean, really, in an essence, that until you really deeply challenge yourself and really test your thinking and then learn to listen better, what can you do? So in essence, if we can couple this rising spirit of creativity, innovation, entrepreneurism with an attitude of fail fast so you can learn faster, but we anchor that in empathy, what's possible? And I'm going to argue everything is possible. So as a K-12 educator, as a parent, and as somebody who's been lucky enough to enter this design realm, I really think that's wonderful. So a couple of years ago, and now this gets to the tangible aspects at the K-12 level. A couple of years ago, I was invited to create, essentially create a school, but it would be a pop-up school. And they said, could you design a 21st century school, a classroom of the future? And it was an exciting endeavor. It felt very real. It felt architectural. It felt like it would have lots of technology. It felt like, anyway, you can imagine how exciting, design a classroom for the future. And I thought about this, and I thought the problem with this is that even if we get it right, what would a teacher do on Monday with that answer? What would a bunch of eighth graders do with that answer come Monday? What would we collectively do with that classroom or program or school of the future? And my gut, and I'm somebody that gets to literally design and build schools around the US and the world, my gut told me something's off about that. And what I began to think about is there a way to create an experience where young people are invited to make a really powerful impact on the future? And most importantly, to develop the wherewithal so that they can respond to unexpected futures in really interesting ways. And can they do that in a way that's deeply caring? And is there a methodology for that? So that was the thing I wondered about. So as I went forward with my team, we started to think and go, well, what would the constraints be? What would the invitation be? What would the expectations be? And could it be something that would be bold and global and really exciting, but also could it work in a classroom Monday morning at a really humble level and a really audacious level? So we said, okay, let's think about this in terms of attitudes and verbs. Can we think of this as a mindset and a way of life, not just a set of tools and objects and curriculum, if you would? So we said, first and foremost, the problems need to be real and in the real world. Two, it needs to be about the process, the messiness, not just the solutions. So less about the answer key and more about the great uncertainty, the inquiry, the wondering about things, not just answering things. It had to be based on humans, not objects. It had to be, again, a mindset, not just tools, and ultimately had to embrace failure. So you can imagine why design thinking, and I'm only hinting at a couple of things tonight, but you can imagine why design thinking became really exciting, because if we really want to embrace failure, we really want to be human focused, we really want to wrestle with messy, big, real world problems, but also make them process based and sort of experiential, then design thinking is a beautiful gift to K-12 educators. It's an extraordinary way of thinking about how can we empower our young people to make a positive impact on the world around them. And oh, by the way, can it work inside our classrooms tomorrow, no matter what we're doing? So that became a way forward. So in essence, now we're getting into kind of that design thinking 101. So as I go forward, I want to kind of move really, really forward and offer that this was a way to express it in a way that over the last couple of years, myself and my collaborators and partners have been exploring this at many scales. So at first, we launched something called Prototype. It's a program, but that we have been running and developing. But in essence, just was a reminder that we never want to get it right. We just want to stay in that state of perpetual curiosity. We were very, very lucky that it got some coverage. And the truth is, we didn't know what we were doing, but we sort of were bold enough to say, let's make an impact. And this is kind of what it looked like. So our first iteration was, in essence, an invitation to rethink the future of education, a new classroom for the future. But in essence, what we were really looking for was less about space and furniture, although there was some of that invitation. It was really to watch young people, to be empathetic about how do they work. And when we began to open ourselves up to not just teaching empathy, but really becoming empathetic towards young people, we began to see them work in different ways. This is a magical moment that I can explain to others down the road if they would like. We started to realize that the kids were hacking the very program materials, spaces around them to create other experiences. So what appears to be simply a table turned upside down or on its side, really what it was is young people on the fly, in order to solve a messy problem, had to hack everything around them, including furniture, so they could create what they needed. In this case, they needed two things. They needed more whiteboards so they could communicate to each other, and they also needed a degree of privacy. So in essence, because we were not just teaching empathy, but really choosing to become empathetic, we were realizing that what these kids need in real time was a constantly evolving learning environment, not just us to teach them the protocols. Two, as we went further, we ran a program in Dallas, Texas, in Deep Ellum, with a bunch of young people that were coming from a lot of different backgrounds. In this case, a lot of young people coming from urban high schools. And we were inviting them not only to be part of a very creative, exploratory, ideation, brainstorming, think out loud kind of experience, but what we really wanted them to do was to become agents for change for the future of Dallas. And in this case, when we really opened up that invitation and made it less about the curriculum and more about how can you change the world, these young people pivoted from how could they create, and the assignment we gave them, to something much bolder. And these 8th and 9th graders challenged us to say, how could the city of Dallas, and listen to this, partner with homeless people to create a more exciting city? Now, what's interesting about this is until these young people opened up our eyes to be empathetic about the homeless under this bridge, we thought what we were doing is helping young people be creative. What they did within 3 days, 8th and 9th graders coming from urban public schools said it's not enough for us to be creative. We must shift the city to becoming an active partner with the homeless, not just offering food or shelter to the homeless. That's a really remarkable on-the-fly experience. In Casper, Wyoming, a year ago, we were invited to work with young people there that came from a wide variety of backgrounds. They came from a small community. You know, Casper is a city, but in essence, it's a small, big community. And we partnered them with a lot of organizations, humane shelters, boys and girls clubs, the Chamber of Commerce. And really what the students started to do using design thinking was not just become creative and not just sort of produce solutions, but what they said is we need to empower a different platform in the city so that the school district and these agencies can team up to create a really interesting future. Again, once we embedded empathy and started to shift our thinking about what kids are capable of doing, and then we invited young people to challenge us back, then it became about, can we launch and prototype real initiatives, real problems, real programs? And it was less about what can we teach them and more about how can we partner with them to do powerful things beyond that. We did something in New Zealand and in Shanghai, China. Recently, I'll show you one about New Zealand, where we invited a bunch of young people to wonder about the impact of stormwater runoff for the entire city and harbor of Wellington, New Zealand. What was really interesting is we created a really remarkable experience where young people got to be creative and prototype. But what was interesting is in the middle of this program and on the upper right, the storms literally started to brew, and there was a massive series of flash floods literally in the city during the 3 days. And suddenly the entire city was overwhelmed with stormwater runoff, cities being flooded, pollution hitting the harbor. And all of a sudden, what these young people said to us, they said it to the mayor of the city, to the university leaders, to myself and others, it's not enough that you teach us to be creative. It's not enough that you teach us to be problem solvers. But until we tackle the future of pollution, we are all a problem. And all of a sudden, we realized that these young people hadn't just followed our lead to become sort of younger versions of us, but they were actually challenging us to be much, much bolder in our thinking, that we had to not just teach them about the environment, but we had to in real time alter the trajectory of an entire city for an entire nation. And these young people said, we're going to start. Are you willing to follow us? So in essence, as I come to a conclusion, what I think is so important is, on one level, it's nothing more complicated than working with young people in real time, in real classrooms, on real school weeks to say, are we willing to be empathetic? Are we willing to be curious? Are we willing to fail? Are we willing to prototype and duct tape and play around with things? But on a bigger level, are we being bold enough? Are we willing to create the conditions by which the young people that we not only teach and serve, but also team up with, are literally going to make a positive dent on the world in real time? And I think in essence, while it's bold to get all of our kids into college, ultimately the design challenge is bigger than that. It's bigger than teaching them skills, and more importantly about assuring that they have the mindset that is non-negotiable about the future. And in essence, the author of Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince, reminds us that if we truly want to, quote unquote, build the ship of innovation, of creativity, it's not enough to learn how to build the boat. We have to long for the horizon line ahead of us. And I think in essence, design thinking is more than a set of tools, a set of methodologies. It's more than pedagogy and curriculum. It's more than a trend. It is in many ways a commitment to the world around us. And in essence, it's a commitment to the young people that we serve and work with on a daily basis, that they can be bolder in real time, and that our classrooms are in essence the base camp for that expedition. So in essence, I'll wrap up tonight. I may have run over a little bit, my apologies, and I probably talked more conceptually at times than pragmatically, but I think when we're talking about a mindset for the future and designing schools and programs for the future, we have to do more than worry about the technology and argue about STEM versus STEAM and worry only about getting kids into college. We have to create a default setting that says our young people are going to be agents of profound impact, and we can't wait until one day. We have to partner with them right now. So with that said, thank you. Or I'll take questions, whatever is useful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, Christian. Um, we've got some people here left. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the box. Or if you use our little emoticon on the top, you can raise your hand, and I'm more than happy to turn on your microphone for you, whatever you feel comfortable doing. A couple of things while you guys are formulating some questions, if you have those. Next Wednesday evening, um, very happy to announce that we have a collaboration with Teach Anti-Bullying out of Pennsylvania, nonprofit organization, and Dr. Cerullo, who's the president and founder of that organization, is doing an event for us next Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's on our website as well as our Facebook page. So we have questions here. All right. Christian, you feel free to answer the questions.
Yes, so I just saw Heidi's questions about what do schools that have mandatory curriculum or firmed up curriculum, what do they do with design thinking, or what's the relationship? And I think that's a very real question that a lot of schools are wrestling with. A lot of individual teachers who are falling in love with design thinking are frankly shutting their classroom door and hacking it. And I think it's very similar to what educators were doing 5 years ago with blogging and wikis and Twitter. And when before it became sort of standard practice, lots of educators just intuitively sensed that blogging or having students have a global audience could have a positive impact. And I know most of them felt that they had mandatory curriculum that dominated their attention. So I think we're in a similar moment in time. What I would say is that it's not a matter of either or. It's not a matter of battling mandatory curriculum, but more in the spirit of design. It's a yes and. It's how do I honor the expectations and the calendar and the curriculum, but at the same time start to take advantage of the language or the perspective of design thinking. So I'll make a connection. I think anyone that's familiar with Ted Sizer and the last 30 years of education, the Coalition of Essential Schools, and the idea of essential questions. So let's take something really simple. Common Core meets mandatory curriculum meets XYZ. Often what's at the heart of that is an essential question. It's trying to understand a thematic question that can open up our understanding of complex issues. And along the way, we have to level up through pragmatic skill development. I think in essence, design thinking becomes a really nice ally when we need to deploy essential questions and sort of an inquiry-based curricular or experiential framework. I think in essence, again, it comes down to the idea that it's an and. How can you start to think like a designer, not necessarily challenge Common Core or whatever it might be? So that's maybe the first thing that comes to mind. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer those or point to resources.
So we have a couple of people typing some questions here, it looks like.
Yeah, and I think also there's a second part of this is every teacher at all levels, regardless of the constraints, the challenges, the expectations, every one of them engages with young people as human beings constantly, whether it's formally as an advisor or a homeroom teacher or a coach or in the lunchroom, wherever it is. And I think simply, quietly, humbly shifting from I'm the expert and these young people need to sort of mature and I'm going to help them X, but really beginning to shift to how can I begin to see these young people I serve and I'm so blessed to teach and guide and coach, how can I start to see them with a new lens? How can I be empathetic to the way they're engaging the world? So instead of how do I teach them and guide them and train them and mentor them, how can I begin to see them through new eyes? And I think in essence, that's the most important part of design thinking and maybe the most valuable thing an educator could do long before they incorporate design thinking into curriculum frameworks. Heidi, what's the biggest challenge teachers have in shifting to design thinking? I want to say I'll offer a challenge that I don't know that teachers believe is a challenge. I think many teachers are looking for explicit pedagogical curricular framework, something they can do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something they can do in math class, etc. And the idea, I think often the challenge is they'll start with how can I do design thinking in my history class in this unit? And I often believe that while that's well-intentioned and honorable, it's not where the power and fuel and potential of design thinking is most valuable. I think it's useful, but it's ultimately maybe the wrong approach. So what I would suggest is that when we design curriculum or we map out a unit, it's not saying how can I do empathy phase 1 and how can I do brainstorming phase 2 and how can I do prototyping phase 4, etc. But instead it's how can I think through this curriculum as a designer? How can I begin to be empathetic towards the characters in this novel? How can I be empathetic towards the collaboration I have with a teacher down the hall? How can I begin to think through the way that I set up my students to even be curious about the topic? And I think long before you execute it, it's how do you live the mindset of it first? And then all of a sudden it begins to become obvious that there are lots of ways to execute that. So that's what comes to mind. Beyond that, I think it's like any methodology that feels new at first is everybody wants to know, is this just trendy? And is it going to go away? So I think a lot of times teachers who become passionate about it they're so excited about it that they impose it passionately on their colleagues or their department. And often other really well-intentioned educators push back because they're like, is this just the new math or another version of blogging, or is this just trendy? And I think often it's less about imposing it and less about being so excited that you must do it. And it's more about learning to be empathetic in a faculty meeting, empathetic and curious in a department cohort. And I think often it's being so overexcited that you don't just live the spirit, you almost sell the spirit. And that's what I would say. What's the biggest impact to the design of space? I would say if we really, that was asked by Karina. I obviously work with a lot of designers, architects, engineers, planners, so I think about this a lot. I think if we really believe in the 4 C's that Tony Wagner talks about in terms of 21st century creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication, we begin to realize that the historic classroom doesn't serve that. So suddenly we start to look at maker spaces, Starbucks, Google, studio spaces as suggestive of the way classrooms can exist. It can be as complicated and as aspirational as let's create an ecology of creative spaces, of science labs and maker spaces and 3D printers and design walls that are covered in idea paint and that our kids are going to be really creative. It can be really bold like that, or it can be as simple as, what if we just put a bunch of Legos pieces in the middle of desks and let kids just play with them as they're also talking about whatever they're talking about. So they start to manipulate things, and it's not an explicit invitation. It's more of, what does it look like when people are able to hack and manipulate and build and just play with things? So I think often those kinds of principles are important, but I would certainly say that designers and design teams and design thinking environments tend to believe that having lots of inexpensive material, cardboard, duct tape, whatever, any material possible that you can manipulate, rip apart, glue, so that you can make tangible an idea is important. I think students being able to write on walls or whiteboards or post-it notes or whatever to be able to explore ideas, to think out loud is important. And then beyond that, there are just many, many levels of complexity, sophistication, and risk, I think. What other questions do I see here?
There's one more from John, kind of.
John, it could be the kid. Help me with that, Kim. Can you read the question that you're seeing so that I don't miss it? I'm afraid I'm skimming over it.
It ends in a question mark. I'm not sure if John was meaning it to be a question, but he's asking, it could be the case that traditional educator preparation doesn't do a good job of.
Yes. Yeah. So, John, I'm a graduate of two
Okay.
schools of education. As an undergrad, I have a degree from a school, College of Education, and as a graduate student as well. And we could have a dozen webinars just in terms of teacher training and schools of education and all of that. So I don't want to overdo my answer. But what I would say is that in terms of teacher training or positioning the traditional educator to prepare is, I think in essence, the traditional invitation was, do you love students or kids, therefore become a teacher? Or do you love your subject, therefore become a teacher? And I think in essence, what I would say is that what teachers have always known is that teaching isn't about loving kids any more than any human being loves kids. And it's not about loving your subject any more than any other human being loves a topic or a discipline they love. What makes it possible for educators to really thrive and be important is to love the messy collision between a subject or a discipline and a student or a learner or a kid. And I think what's been wonderful historically about remarkable educators and coaches and rabbis and whomever they are is the really remarkable ones. Sure, they love their subject, sure, they love kids, but what they really love is the messy intersection between them. And I think design thinking, if you will, absolutely has a love affair with the messy intersection between human beings and a range of subjects, a range of material, a range of topics, a range of questions. And I think in essence, if we really did teacher development, teacher training, teacher mentoring, and really went all in on that messy intersection between human beings and ideas, and we believe that design thinking does that really well, then that would be an interesting way of fostering undergrad and graduate schools of education, and frankly, the process of first, second, fifth year teachers in schools, and to be honest, teachers at all levels. So that's maybe what comes to mind.
I like that, messy collision and embrace failure, Christian. I think those are really important to the process.
And a lot of the work that my partners and I do really uses design thinking not as explicit curriculum, although it's wonderful to do it in that realm, but it really is about professional development. It's really not just teaching teachers how to do design thinking, but using design thinking to empower educators to really push on the boundaries of what it means to be curious, what it means to learn, what it means to collaborate, what it means to develop learning environments that are whatever it might be. So a lot of our work is really working with educators and those that they work with to foster learning environments that are magical and creative and believe that the human beings around them are the best resources. And so I think what I would recommend is not trying to learn how to execute design thinking as specific curriculum on a specific unit day, but instead is how can it foster a new culture of professional educators working with each other, learning to be empathetic with each other, learning how to be curious about each other, learning how to create the conditions by which human beings will thrive in schools. My gut is if it's kind of like being a lifeguard. If a lifeguard is physically healthy and not at risk, they're remarkably good at saving people's lives. But lifeguards who are at risk and are being a victim has wrapped their arms around that lifeguard could sink, drown, and die. And I am exaggerating to make a point, but I think educators who are thriving, educators who are in love with collaboration, educators who have access to lots of other peers and teammates and a network, they inherently are better teachers. And I think design thinking says you can't do this alone. And it's not enough to be expert and right. Instead, you have to be madly curious and empathetic and willing to team up with people because the problems are bigger than us.
That's so powerful. That's just amazing to hear about the collaborative piece that I think a lot of teachers haven't quite caught on to that yet. We have one more question. We're running out of time, so we'll take one more question from Kelly about how do you help the parents understand the value of design thinking?
I have a 4-year-old and I have a 7-year-old. And so I think about the parent side of things a lot. So I'll make it really, really simple. I have yet to meet a parent who won't trust you or at least deeply respect your intentions if you deeply believe in their child. And so in essence, if design thinking inherently believes in human beings, and if as an educator you're using design thinking or at least embracing the mindset in order to empower and guide and support and invest in the human beings, the kids, the students, my gut is that's going to resonate with parents. So instead of treating it as if your kids do this, they'll get into college, or if your kids learn this way, they'll do better in science class, I don't think that's the right way. I think what it is I'm creating a classroom culture, a program culture that says your young person, the most important gift you can give to the world, your young person matters. Their voice matters, their interest matters, their struggles matter, and frankly, their potential matters. So I'm going to create an environment, regardless of constraints and challenges, I'm going to create an environment that says your young person matters, and we're going to figure out a way so that for the rest of their lives, they can make a positive impact in the world. And oh, by the way, find the resources, the experiences, the human beings, the opportunities, the jobs, the whatever, where they can do great things. And I think design thinking, to be really blunt, is as good as anything we have out there. And frankly, I think it does a better job than most educational methodologies, which frankly are arguing something different. I'm also going to argue that kids will do better in their effort to get into college. And more importantly, if we're all serious about that, the real challenge is not getting kids into college. It's will they be there a year later and will they thrive? And the vast majority of research says that the classic academic commitment may have a strong correlation to getting into college, but has a very, very modest, if not non-existent correlation to thriving once you're there. I would argue that design thinking not only positions young people to get in, and to be relevant, but also more importantly, to thrive once they're there. So that would be my longer conversation with a parent who cared deeply about that question. I think it was a great question to ask, so thank you.
Yes, thank you for all of the questions. We're running out of time, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. And we'll have to have you back, Christian, to continue talking. There have been some questions coming up about parents, so that would be an interesting aspect for you to talk about next time. I think that's really, and we focus on the educator tonight, and I think that this introduction has been wonderful, and we can expand it by talking about parents. So I think that's fabulous. So we're going to go ahead, and I hate to wrap this up tonight, but thank you so much, Christian, for taking time to join us tonight. We're sorry that David Jakes had a schedule conflict and he couldn't join us, but those of you going to TCEA next week in Austin, Christian and David will be presenting, I believe, on Wednesday. So look for them there in the Digital Square area with Scott Floyd.
We'll be presenting, we'll be doing a workshop on Wednesday morning, a tweet up about learning environments and spaces that afternoon, and then another workshop on Thursday morning.
Awesome. I knew you're going to be there quite a bit in that area presenting. So
I see we accidentally lost Kim there real quick, but I want to thank you again, Christian, for taking time to come out today. Oops, we got an echo coming. And I see we have a lot of people from my Facebook and business page here, and also some people who registered coming in. So just real quick before we shut everything down here, these links here are live. Christian put his email in the chat box, but these web links are live. Some of them are Christian's sites and resources that he discussed tonight and that he's involved with, and some others have to do with Learning Liaisons, our website, some of our new things that we're rolling out. I just want to mention again for those people that just dropped in, our next online workshop is next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. and you can register on our events page on the Learning Liaisons Facebook page or on our website on our workshop page. And we have Teach Anti-Bullying Organization President Dr. Cerullo doing a webinar or workshop on bullying, cyberbullying, and internet safety. So we thank you again, Christian. What I'll do is I will leave this classroom open for a few minutes if you want to check out the links and save them on your computer. All you have to do is double click or click on them and hit the browse too. And thanks again, Christian.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You guys have a good night.
sorry about that, Christian. I got kicked out. But anyway, thank you so much, Christian, and thank you everybody for joining us.